I'm Rantasmo, and He-Man needs more gay. So maybe you've heard something about the recently announced reboot of She-Ra coming to Netflix next month. In particular, you may have seen the main character's redesign, which seems to have caused something of a stir. The criticisms are many, ranging from cartoon made for children not sexy enough, to cartoon indicative of cultural trend catering increasingly less to straight male desires, and I am uncomfortable when we are not about me. But one particular claim caught my eye. The idea that She-Ra's new androgynous design flies in the face of what she is ostensibly meant to represent, the feminine ideal, with her male counterpart He-Man presumably representing a masculine ideal. According to She-Ra's co-creator J. Michael Straczynski, She-Ra was never really intended to be the ideal woman. She was meant to be a warrior. We could argue until we're blue in the face about what the feminine ideal even means and who decides whether or not a character conforms to it, but let's be honest, I'm not really the best authority there. What I am an authority on, however, is muscle dudes, and with regard to He-Man, is there perhaps a grain of truth here? Does He-Man represent a certain masculine ideal? It's difficult to associate He-Man, even just the name He-Man, with anything but the most extreme forms of masculinity. The term He-Man has been used since the 19th century. It was synonymous with manly strength and virility, and it often came with a tinge of toxicity. In the 20s and 30s, it became associated with things like the Little Rascals' precursor to Men Going Their Own Way.
Now what do you say if we form a new club and call it the He-Man Woman Haters Club?
And advertisements urging men to stop being weaklings and become real men. Surely He-Man, the muscle-bound, giant, phallic sword-wielding warrior, must represent the very pinnacle of toxic heterosexual masculinity, right? Well, it turns out the answer to that is complicated. The landscape of children's animation is one where many cartoons live or die based on their ability to sell toys. And more than anything else, the original He-Man cartoon was a half-hour toy commercial, one of the very first cartoons to be made for that explicit purpose. The plot is thin. I mean, we're talking razor thin. Who are the Masters of the Universe? Is Skeletor one of them? Where did he come from? Where did his face go? In this particular series, we don't really get many details. What we do know is that He-Man is 16 years old. Man, look at him. Look at how extremely 16 he is. He defends Castle Grayskull against Skeletor and his minions, and he's the alter ego of Prince Adam. And Prince Adam is...
a work of art like my famous spiced bread takes time, Cringer.
By this point, you may have noticed that this show has some subtext. I mean, look, you've heard all the jokes before. The pink outfit, the skimpy leather harness, Fisto. There's a guy named Fisto. It would be very easy for this to just be a video where I list all of He-Man's weird homoerotic references, make a joke about fabulous secret powers, show you a clip from this old classic, and then just call it a day. But I try to be a little more ambitious than that. It's definitely fair to say that the world of He-Man is one where traditional masculinity is highly valued. The same can be said for pretty much any cartoon where the villain is a devious, perhaps even mincing mastermind, more likely to utilize intellect and deception against a hero more known for their physical strength. He-Man's inception is also not without its red flags. According to interviews with the creators, He-Man's famous catchphrase, "I have the power," was inspired in part by market research that showed young boys' desire to rebel against maternal authority figures.
We saw these little kids going, "You do this because I tell you to do it." You know, exactly the words their mother was saying. So they wanted the power. So that's where the power theme came up.
So, you know, there's a lot there. Even so, the show does have some slightly subversive things to say about masculinity, however unintentionally. He-Man himself is an archetypal warrior, inspired by classic barbarian imagery, but in practice he's remarkably nonviolent. That's out of necessity more than anything else. He-Man came on the heels of heavy deregulation from the FCC that in effect allowed it to be a half-hour toy commercial, but it still had to contend with cultural standards regarding violence and sexual content. Thus why He-Man almost never actually uses his sword against another living being, opting instead to throw them into the nearest puddle. Prince Adam is pretty consistently portrayed as more effeminate than He-Man. He's gentle, sensitive, his interests are unconventional.
My famous spice bread.
What the show does not do, however, is portray that femininity as an inherent negative. His associates do sometimes refer to him as cowardly, but that's more of a byproduct of his whole Clark Kent, how come you always run away just before Superman shows up thing. Prince Adam is not really a coward any more than Clark Kent is a coward. He's also every bit as physically jacked as He-Man, again probably out of necessity, allowing the toy creators to use the same body mold for both personas, but it also has the side effect of showing that strength and femininity are not mutually exclusive. The same can't necessarily be said for Skeletor, who is by no means unjacked, but is still characterized mostly by his deviousness and trickery. The discourse surrounding gay villains is as much of a minefield as it's ever been, but I think part of the reason why so many queer-coded villains are still sort of celebrated in the queer community is that they're often just way more fun than the heroes. And I think Skeletor is a great example of that. Since the show already has such a gay aesthetic to it and came out in the early 80s, a number of gay fans have interpreted Skeletor as being symbolic of the HIV/AIDS crisis, his skeletal face and muscular body being somewhat reminiscent of men who took anabolic steroids as a treatment for HIV wasting syndrome. Again, this is not to say that the creators of He-Man had very much in mind beyond selling toys, but I do think the varied ways in which He-Man portrays masculinity and the queer subtext that people have drawn from it does make it a tad less shallow than it might appear at first glance. Does He-Man represent a masculine ideal? I think more than anything, he demonstrates that our idea of what masculinity is doesn't have to be just one thing. That we can honor traditional archetypes without cutting ourselves off from an entire spectrum of expression. And that strength and power don't always have to equate to violence. Though if I'm being honest, I can definitely think of a few people I'd like to throw into a puddle right about now.